So welcome back, everyone. We're switching subjects and transitioning to mobility, and our final Connect Talk presenter is Marc Rosekind. Marc was appointed by President Obama to serve as the 15th administrator of the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, and earlier this year, Marc joined Zoox, an autonomous vehicle startup company, as their Chief Safety Innovation Officer. I first met Marc earlier this year and still remember some of the statistics that he cited on transportation safety. I think it was 35,092. Is that right?
Yeah. And it's up.
And it's going up.
Yeah.
Every year, 35,092 people die in car accidents in the United States, and it's increasing, which is all the more reason for technology to improve the safety of our transportation systems. So Marc's going to provide some thoughts on proactive safety, mobility, and sustainability. Please join me in welcoming Marc Rosekind.
Thank you, Marc. So what he didn't tell you was I'm third generation San Francisco, grew up in San Bruno, Foster City. My home's been in Mountain View for about 25 years. So I have a whole bunch of suits and ties that are sitting in the closet now that hopefully will not be coming out forever, right? So I think it's such a kick to come back and all of a sudden find out, got to take it off, right? Okay, don't even start with it. So first of all, everybody put your seatbelts on. We're going to get this to work because the biggest changes in transportation in a century since Henry Ford are happening to you right now. I'm checking. I used to head the safety regulatory agency for the country. I'm checking. Get those seatbelts on, ready? Because this change is going on. It's the biggest in 100 years, and it is affecting everybody. And what I'm going to do is really talk about the top 3 things that are going to be huge benefits and advantages to your life. And I'm going to go through these, give you what the advantages are. We'll talk about the magic that's coming, which is all the technology that's going to make this happen. And then quickly, we're going to also talk about what some of the challenges are. And believe it or not, I'm going to actually try and leave a minute at the end so we could take a question or two if you would like, all right? So the first thing is, if you think about it, transportation is such a big deal because it touches every one of us every single day. And it's all about moving people and goods, right? We actually pay a pretty high price for that. That's in the next slide that's coming. But what's really interesting is this new mobility revolution that is coming. We are talking about making this transportation system more productive. Just think, a fully autonomous car. You can now be reading, sleeping intentionally, right? Or doing anything else you want. More productive, more efficient, no congestion. Could there be higher speed limits if we can actually put them closer and they're not going to hit each other? And more cost effective. There's not going to be 2 cars in your garage. There might not even be 1 car in your garage. And I think what's really interesting is there's some people that are going to only know transportation and mobility as a service because they're never going to get their driver's license or own a vehicle. The other thing that's down there that's kind of interesting is a lot of years, transportation has actually divided communities, where there just isn't access for people to do what they have to do every day. This new revolution that's coming actually has an opportunity for some greater equity, where transportation actually becomes a unifier instead of a divider. So this is the number. It's up for 2016, 37,461. When I was head of NHTSA, I made sure everybody knew exactly what that number was, the exact number. Because people love to say, oh, it's close to 38,000. Every one of those is somebody you know. That is a father, mother, brother, sister, coworker, one of your neighbors. Everybody's been touched by this. And what's really interesting is when you think about this on a larger scale, this is the biggest jumbo jet you can think of crashing every week for an entire year. So if we did that in the United States, we'd close the entire air system after about a week, and yet this has been going on for 50 years since we've been counting. And what's really, really challenging for us is we know that 94% of the 6.3 million crashes that happen every single year are because of us. So what's the magic sauce about the technology? A fully autonomous vehicle will not get drunk, right? Will not drive drowsy, will not drive distracted. So we're talking about when people say, how much safer can we get? There's your first target, eliminating 94% of crashes that are related to us, the humans. So last thing I just want to mention here quickly. So mobility. Safety is a huge opportunity. And the third advantage is transportation is the #2 contributor in the United States to greenhouse gases. So Professor Hawkins, just a few months ago, said we have about 100 years to find a new home. Okay? So when you think about electrifying all these new fleets or finding other alternate fuels, this is probably the biggest transition for us as a society when we think about what this could mean. Mobility, safety, sustainability. These are 3 huge, my wife says I'm not supposed to use that word anymore, but these are like huge things that will touch absolutely every person's life, every single day. So keep the seatbelt on, because the technology is already here. This is the magic sauce. People are like, well, what's coming? This stuff is already, I love this. When I was administrator, people would always say, when is this going to happen? And it's already here. So many of these things are already on your vehicles. And you can have not just cruise control, but adaptive cruise control. And you can have blind spot monitoring and lane keeping. And there's autopilot in Teslas. This technology is already in vehicles. In fact, one of the things we did at NHTSA that was really groundbreaking was we challenged the industry to make automatic emergency braking. Your car will stop so it won't hit anything. Don't hit stuff, right? And we actually challenged the industry to say, make that standard, not just an option or a high end, make it standard across all your lines. We should all benefit from that. So by regulation, probably take us at least 10 years to make that happen. And we challenged the industry, and 99.6% of all new vehicles by 2022 will have automatic emergency braking. Because 20 global automakers said, fine, we'll do that, without having to do the regulation. I say that because that will beat regulation by 3 or 4 years, which means we can count the lives saved and crashes eliminated by not hitting. And AEB, we're talking 40% of rear-end crashes eliminated, 29% of front end. Okay, so this technology is already out there. We have to democratize it so everybody gets it and gets the benefits. But this magic sauce is already there. And what are the challenges for all of us to acknowledge what's coming? The top one is there because it's a test, okay? When people say autonomous vehicles, that's a lot of things. So ADAS, extra credit if you know what that is, but I won't make you actually write it down. So those are advanced driver assistance systems. Advanced driver assistance systems. That's all that technology I just told you about. But they're individual or packages of things that assist and support the driving task. That's different from an autonomous vehicle. We're getting rid of the steering wheel. We're getting rid of the brake pedal. We're getting rid of the driver. Okay, a fully autonomous vehicle, a fully self-driving car is going to drive itself and you safely, right? So that's one of the first things is for all of us just to get educated enough to make sure that we know the difference between all these different technologies and autonomous vehicles. Very different things. Next, guess what? Every technological transformation that occurs in our country, jobs get created, jobs get disrupted. So you got to know that's coming. Right now, everybody's talking about the jobs we're going to lose. What's really interesting is people aren't really quantifying yet the jobs we're going to gain. Great Wired article, and I'm going to get the statistic wrong, but it was really fascinating. Somebody actually identified in the 1950 census of the 271 jobs, all the occupations that were identified. In the last one, 60 years later, there was only one job that was no longer actually on the census. Any idea what that might be? Think about that, 60 years, all the changes and the revolution of, right, industries, technology, elevator operator. Which is a perfect example of the technology challenge we have, right? Are people going to get into that? Okay, so we're almost there, because that's the last one on the year. The other is a transition. Just for everyone to think about this, it's actually going to be 20 or 30 years for this full transition to take place. We're going to have people with their hands on their wheels, semi-autonomous vehicles, and fully autonomous, no driver, on the same roads for 20 or 30 years. The average length of a lifespan for a car right now is 11 and a half years. Okay, so if you look at the fleet, it typically takes 20 to 30 years for the entire fleet, 265 million vehicles on a road. Usually takes 20 or 30 years for that to turn over. So even if you had the perfect technology or the perfect vehicle today, it's still going to take you 20 or 30 years to actually see all those benefits that we were talking about. We're not thinking about it a lot, but people got to start focusing on this transition period because there's going to be a lot of change. And I put the last one in there because basically this is the biggest thing. You going to trust it? I'm back to the elevator operator. Why did that position stay all those years, right? Am I going to get in there and go up or down? And having that human push that button for a long, long time made us feel comfortable to do that. I think trust for all of us in robots and machines and giving up the wheel and control, that's going to be one of the biggest things for us to figure out how much this is really going to change our society. And my last slide here actually is going to be moderating a panel. I asked Chris Gerdes, who's a professor at Stanford, a friend of mine, been doing this stuff for 20 plus years. Chris, what's going to change with this new revolution coming? And his answer was basically everything. So what's really interesting is people are going to focus on the technology. You need to focus on how life changes. Not just that you or a family member could be alive, because they're not going to be hurt or killed in a crash, but also just think about what this means for an aging population that doesn't have to give up They can give up their keys, but they don't have to give up their mobility. A disabled community that is so excited about this, they never had a license, they don't need a license anymore. And even kids, right? So what's really interesting is we're talking about for everybody, this is going to touch your life. It's going to be the most significant mobility revolution literally in 100 years. And this is buckle up, folks, because this is going to be the ride of your life, and it's already here. Thank you. I still have a minute if you'd like to ask a question. Yes? I got you. Go ahead.
Okay, so maybe I'll ask it for the sake. So Emily Beach, City of Burlingame, a council member. I also sit on the Transportation Authority Board of Directors in San Mateo County, and it has huge implications for how we deal with infrastructure for the automobile. So I'm curious, knowing that we are such an innovative part of the world, do you envision this transformation, which you say it does take maybe 20, 30 years to really mass, affect the whole society? Do you see us adopting, what do you see the speed at which the Silicon Valley will start to adopt this faster than the rest of the world? And should we be thinking about, how can you give us seeds of thought as we look at our infrastructure?
So I think just
particularly
the fact
highway.
And I think just the fact that you're asking that question, what's really critical is these changes are coming. And I've seen this with everybody. The last 2 hearings I did in the House and the Senate were all about job displacement. I'm sitting there thinking, okay, you have 20 or 30 years to figure this out. Let's start now. Same thing with your question. This means changing how we pour concrete, the number of parking spaces, curbs for drop-off, et cetera. Start planning it now. San Francisco's starting some pilot studies. Here, it's like, how does this affect us and how do we change now in our planning for the future? That's what we can do with this, I think. And that's what's actually good about that 20 or 30-year transition. It's not going to be tomorrow. I hope the Valley will be really quick in doing this because the benefits are so tremendous. But it's going to take a while. So we have time to figure all those pieces out. So I'm going to stop, because that's what it says there.
Thank you, Marc.
There you go.
Let's all give Marc a round of applause.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Well, as we just heard, rapidly advancing technology will soon change how we approach mobility. It is currently changing how we approach mobility, the movement of goods and people. And apart from shifting the auto-centric model, there are significant policy implications and opportunities with electric and autonomous vehicles, ride-sharing, and other transportation advancements. Our next panel, the Age of Autonomous Things, brings together 3 companies who will provide insight on what we anticipate to be a paradigm shift in the coming decade. And joining me to introduce the panel is SAMCEDA President and CEO, Rosanne Foust. Thanks, Rosanne.
So what I'd like to do, thank you, we'd like to bring up our 3 panelists. So we have Ryan Popple, who is the CEO of Proterra. We have Peter Gigante, who is the head of policy research for Lyft. And Peter is going to tell you why I pronounced his name like that. And we have Ryan Tuohy, who's the VP of Business Development for Starship Technologies. All 3 of these individuals will give you a snippet of their companies and kind of the age of autonomy. And then we're going to go into Q&A from the public. So get your questions ready. Thank you for being here.
Thanks.
First.
Yes, thanks. All right, good morning, everybody. I'm going to cover, most of my presentation will be about the electrification of fleet vehicles. Although the panel is Age of Autonomous Things, most of what we're deploying in the market today is a high-efficiency electric vehicle with some autonomous capability. The reason I'm going to focus on how far we've come in terms of fleet electrification is I think it is very important that we look at these technologies synergistically. So I think for us, it's important to understand where the market is today. There's absolutely no reason at all why we have to implement, thank you, AV technology onto our legacy drivetrain technology. And there's a good probability that vehicle miles traveled will go up with AV. So it's absolutely critical that we implement the most sustainable and zero-emission drivetrain possible. One comment I'd add to the last presentation is in the state of California, transportation is our #1 source of greenhouse gas emissions. So while we've done an excellent job of reducing the energy impact of the built environment and the grid, we have a long way to go on transportation, and it's getting worse. So without further ado, let me walk you through my clicker is not autonomous. There we go. All right, so Proterra, what do? We're an electric vehicle manufacturer. For the mass transit vehicle industry, this technology will not remain just in mass transit, but for many reasons we decided to deploy fleet electric vehicle technology into public transit first. We are headquartered in Burlingame, California, right down the road from here, and I think that's an important thing to talk about today. If we are forward thinking on these technologies, if we are the early deployment markets for these technologies, we're going to have the jobs. If Proterra did not exist, the electric vehicle mass transit market in the United States would be defined by Chinese companies. And the engineering jobs and the intellectual property stays in the home country. So we have a choice to make in all of these technologies. Do we want to import it or do we want to create it? And if we import it, we may pick up some of the sales and service jobs. We will not pick up any of the competitive advantage or the manufacturing. So I'm incredibly proud of the fact that in addition to having a bunch of traditional rocket scientists, smart engineers on staff, which is what we do well in Silicon Valley, we also have manufacturing in the Bay Area. We have manufacturing in LA County, and we have manufacturing in Greenville, South Carolina. So we're a 350-person company. 5 years ago, we were probably a 50-person company. And if you measure that effect with our supply chain, 70% of the parts we use in this vehicle come from other US companies, like a motor manufacturer in Colorado, a composite body manufacturer in Rhode Island. Next slide. I'll do a wink or a... so this is the presentation that I didn't cut down. Can we pull up the shortened one? Or the one that we edited down? My staff thought I was the keynote speaker at the UN Summit for Sustainability. So they sent over 50 slides covering climate change, urban inequality, advanced mobility. So we deleted some of them. Yeah. Is this the updated one? Okay, great. Okay, awesome. So first point is we make transit buses. Transit buses are just one of the cogs in a multimodal transportation world. For those of you who drove over here this morning, you can see in this parking lot how economically inefficient we currently are. We are very forward thinking in the Bay Area, but we're not moving nearly as fast as many other parts of the world in eliminating our dependency on car culture. You will not hear me try to convince you that electric mass transit buses, whether autonomous or driven, are the future of transportation infrastructure. They're just one building block. And you look at these technologies, and on one side of the spectrum, you've got convenience. On the other side of the spectrum, you have efficiency. We will probably have autonomous flying EV taxis, but most of the people who work at my company will not be able to afford rides on them. We will still be dependent on mass transit for the backbone of our society's transportation. So it's very important that we clean that up. We see in particular in the Bay Area, there's a transportation gap, and it's so severe that companies like Google, Facebook, Genentech, LinkedIn, probably this company as well, they have purchased and deployed over 1,000 heavy-duty diesel buses to make up for the lack of mass transit infrastructure. So we are very forward-thinking in California. We are also car culture in California. And what we're finding is with young knowledge workers in particular, they have much less interest in driving a car than their parents' generation did. Also, as Americans, we've taken productivity gains to our pocketbook, not to our work-life balance. So all this technology has not made our workday shorter. So a lot of these engineers at Facebook and Google, they want to be driven to work, whether by a robot or a human being, so they can get an hour of work done on the way, an hour of work done on the way home, and they can actually play with their kids or hang out with their friends when they get home. So the most popular way to get to work, if you work at Apple or if you work at Facebook, and a deal breaker in terms of accepting a job for many high-value employees is whether or not they can access some form of mass transit. Obviously, we need more if private companies have a fleet that is larger than San Francisco's bus fleet. So we're going to have a lot of transit, a lot of urbanization. One of the points I want to make is there's a massive amount of pollution associated with the current way we move everything. In transportation, we're still critically dependent on oil. We saw that during the hurricanes, the number of systems that went down within days simply from shutting down a few refineries in Texas. So mass transit is green from a congestion perspective, but from a local air quality perspective, our transit system, in particular in the Bay Area, is still a diesel system. There's a small auto manufacturer based in Germany called Volkswagen that educated the entire world recently on how dangerous diesel pollution is. But all pollution is not created equal. Diesel gives you particulate matter, and particulate matter is a known carcinogen. It's about the nastiest pollutant that comes out of a vehicle that you can expose children to, people with respiratory conditions, elderly. And in the Bay Area, we're way behind the rest of California. If you look at Southern California, they moved to natural gas first. Multiple cities have also declared that they will be 100% electric by 2030. We only have 2 transit agencies in the Bay Area that have a zero-emission vehicle action plan. One is Stockton, one is San Jose. The rest of them are fairly undefined about it. So again, we are very green. I just sometimes think we take our green for granted and assume that someone else is doing it. We should not be behind Southern California in electric vehicle adoption. One of the reasons why we're so passionate about cracking this market open for electric vehicles and mass transit is mass transit tends to be the tip of the spear in terms of heavy-duty vehicle technology. The mass transit vehicle, it's kind of like the sports car of heavy vehicles. It's the most expensive vehicle. It's a relatively small market. It's a very difficult market to serve. The vehicles have to last 12 years. So just like Tesla started with the Roadster as the first place to bring electric vehicle technology, believe it or not, the high price point premium category in heavy duty is the city bus. It's going to start with city bus. It's going to go to school bus. It's going to go to garbage trucks. And the holy grail is going to be sub 300-mile delivery trucks. If we could get those assets off of diesel and onto EV, we would significantly improve the air quality in the Bay Area. It would have a massive effect on greenhouse gases, but more acutely, those spare the air days, the days when you can taste the air, a lot of that is particulate matter. And it's not necessarily your cars, it's trucks, buses, school buses. And I think we are going to look back and conclude that probably the worst thing we were doing with fossil fuels from a transportation perspective was school buses. Proterra doesn't build school buses. We're looking at going into this market with some other partner companies. But the more I've learned about diesel, the crazier I think it is that we have diesel pollution anywhere near school-age children. I got 3 kids, 12 and under. This is a really serious problem. I don't think we're estimating the cost of it at all. It's also an inequality problem. The kids of the parents who are working at Facebook and Google are getting dropped off by a Land Rover plug-in hybrid third-row seat SUV. Kids in East Palo Alto, Oakland are primarily going to school on buses, or they're walking or they're taking a city bus. So the diesel is closest to the communities of color, the disadvantaged communities. So there's a better way. The good news about electric vehicles and California in particular is we've already done a pretty good job of cleaning up the grid. Last thing I read is it's possible that we hit our 50% renewable portfolio standard for the electrical grid in California 10 years early. So if we're going to have all that clean electricity, we should figure out other things to do with it. So this is what we do as a company. We build battery electric buses. They're really awesome vehicles. They're carbon fiber, composite. They run on electric motors, batteries, similar types of battery technology that you see in all these EVs. But the neat thing is the average income of a Proterra bus rider is significantly different than the average income of a brand new EV car driver. From a greenhouse gas perspective, for those of you who represent an agency that has a climate change target, electric buses are a nice arrow in the quiver in that you're looking at an 80% greenhouse gas reduction. That's on a well-to-wheel basis. In California, it's a little hard to read there, but it's the middle bar. We estimate that today it's an 88% reduction because we've largely weaned ourselves off of coal in terms of our grid. The cleanest, cheapest electric vehicle fuel we know of is the Pacific Northwest. We have, not surprisingly, our largest market is California. Second largest, though, is Washington State. We refer to them as the Saudi Arabia of electricity. They have hydroelectric and they have wind. So on a mile per gallon basis, an electric bus in Seattle gets the cost equivalent of 45 miles per gallon. So electricity is getting cheaper, it's getting greener, and we should be using it as much as possible. Main takeaway here is that mass transit buses are a very efficient, low-cost way to move a lot of people who are going the same place at the same time, like work, an event to the city. You combine a mass transit vehicle with an electric vehicle drivetrain, and you have the lowest cost, lowest environmental impact. This is a really important point. When we add AV into this equation, if we can put these three together, I think we're going to have the lowest cost, lowest carbon option. People are still going to take a variety of forms of transportation. You see it in the city. We're going to have bikes, walking, electric scooters, autonomous electric taxis. Some of them may fly as well. But we're still going to need those trains, and we're still need those buses, especially for people who need to save every transportation dollar they possibly can. By the way, that's the majority of Americans. This is also a very important takeaway. This has already happened. So I'm not here to convince you that electric buses are a good idea. My main thing I want to accomplish in the Bay Area is just to get the Bay Area to catch up. We tend to assume that if it's green and it's high tech, it's happening here. We have electric buses on the streets in Nashville, Louisville, Lexington. Savannah, Georgia just passed a city council resolution saying they're not going to buy another diesel bus. Park City, Utah, but all these little dots are fleets where we've already deployed. Third largest market is Texas. So this is a best practice, even if you're not a left coast state. So this is a tool, it's right there. We even have utilities like PG&E that are mandated by law, SB 32, to facilitate and fund electric vehicle infrastructure. So this is an area where I hope we can leapfrog ahead. It would be a shame for the Bay Area to actually have to be covered by a state-level mandate, which may actually happen before some of the agencies around here have purchased their first electric vehicle. So we got to move faster on this, and it'll be a really good thing from a local air quality perspective. So that's it. And appreciate any questions you've got. We have a little bit of AV going on in our fleet, but we're primarily electric vehicle experts. Marc, do you want me to wait till the end for questions or take some now?
Wait till the end. That'd be
Got
great.
it. Okay.
Yeah, we're going to do all three speakers and then take group Q&A.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ryan.
Good morning, everybody. As Rosanne mentioned, my name is Peter Gigante. I lead the policy research team at Lyft. I've been there for about 4.5 years, so very deeply embedded in all things transportation and specifically ride sharing. Gigante was just because when I moved to California, my first time, everyone was calling me Mr. Gigante, and I didn't quite understand why until I found out that our lovely baseball team goes by the Gigantes. So there we are. You can call me whatever you like, but not late for dinner. So just wanted to talk about, this is a presentation we've given lots of times before, mostly to actually transit agencies of all groups, but I think this is some widely applicable information. Actually, just by show of hands, how many people have actually taken a Lyft? All right, lots of you. Cool, that's great. So I'm not going to go too much into how it works, but I'm going to tell you sort of where it came from and where we're going with it. So Lyft started in 2012 in San Francisco, as you probably know. What most people don't know is before that, it was a company called Zimride, and Zimride was the same two founders, John Zimmer and Luke and Green, who figured out that there should be some sort of web presence where people can offer seats in their cars for trips that they're already planning to make. And this was very popular with college students. A lot of people were planning spring break trips or holiday trips and offering seats in their cars, but it never seemed to get the real volume that they were looking for. And they realized that after the dawn of mobile technology that, hey, we could probably do this with shorter distance in inner city trips on demand. And could we convince people to let other people into their cars? Carpooling programs had been around for decades. Most of them were never successful, and economics and trust were really the two major issues into why that never worked. Sort of leveraging mobile technology and social networks, turns out, yes, you can actually get people to offer up seats in their cars. And so this is what we're seeing is, an average car for most people is used maybe 4% of its lifetime. You're usually driving it alone. So there's lots of opportunity for getting those seats filled if you give people enough incentive. And so generally thinking about the commuter choice, you've seen that there's been two major modes, right? It's either you drive yourself, which is how most of America gets around, or transit, but there really wasn't a lot of micro-transit in between. What other options are there? And for someone like me, I am 36 years old. I've never had a driver's license. I've lived in New York. I've lived in San Francisco. So expanding transportation options that don't involve a driver's license are really important to me. And so Lyft, when it came along, was really an amazing revolution. And so we're looking at a shift from how we normally think about it, that you need to have a car, you need to have a license, and this is something that you drive yourself, into an option, a universe that's expanding into a portfolio of transportation options. And we think this is important for the current situation, we also think it's very important going into the future. We know that traffic and congestion in cities is getting more severe as we're getting larger cities and more people. Even in San Francisco, we see massive building, housing construction going on, which is long overdue, which is great. But also, how do we move that many more people around the city in an efficient manner? And if everyone believes that they still need to own their own personal vehicle, that's not going to work. And this is where we have seen growth in Lyft in general, which is great, and growth specifically in Lyft Line, which is the shared ride mode. We know that where it's available, 40% of our customers have chosen a shared ride mode. That's huge. When you think about the millions of people that are using Lyft on a weekly basis, that is a massive amount of sharing going on, sharing of rides that normally wouldn't have been before. So we think that that's really fantastic. So ways that we're looking at being sustainable and really getting at reducing vehicle miles traveled, get vehicle occupancy up. We know that can be done if you have the right incentives and the right systems in place. Pricing of car trips, so people are much more aware now of the cost of transportation when it's not all baked into the cost of a vehicle. Most people they don't think about what does this trip to the grocery store cost me. They think about sort of the monthly fees associated with it, but even then it's still very abstracted. Whereas if you actually get people thinking about the cost of every trip that they take, they make smarter choices. Also, connecting to transit. I know you've probably seen some articles out there that say Lyft and competitors are being competitive with transit agencies, and I think that is very much not the case. Two reasons. One, the business opportunity is not against transit riders, it is against personal vehicle owners. So if we can convince you to give up your car for the benefit of society, that's an enormous amount of money. As trillions of dollars are spent on personal vehicles every year, transit riders are generally not going to bring in that scale of revenue. And so we think that there's also a lot of opportunity, especially in suburban areas, to connect with transit. We know that people out there don't have a lot of opportunities. It's usually just your car, maybe a bus line, maybe there's one rail station that passes through, but you're really not having this full portfolio of options. And so it's really important for those people as well to have more options. And as someone mentioned before, people with disabilities, senior communities, there's huge opportunity there, which we're also moving into. You may have seen articles where we've been very involved with non-emergency medical transport. Those are sort of paratransit-like systems that get people to and from medical appointments that are not emergency. There's just transportation is so distributed through lots of different aspects of our lives, and so making a system that is efficient and affordable is really at the core of what we're trying to do. Sort of addressed that already. Last mile connections, suburban transit, on-demand paratransit, off-peak service. We know large portions, I think about 40% of our rides are happening nights and weekends, which is when most transit agencies would say that they don't focus on their service. Most of their service is focused on commuter rides. Go Centennial. This is a partnership, just by example, we did with Centennial, Colorado. They will fully subsidize rides to and from the station within this little geofenced area. They realized that their circulator bus system was really inefficient and very expensive per ride. We're looking for active solutions to get a better customer experience at a lower price point. And so far, this has been sort of the shining example of where this all kind of works together. So talking about the road ahead, obviously we see there's a huge opportunity with autonomous vehicles, but we know there's a big debate about how does autonomous roll out, how does it look, if everyone buys an autonomous vehicle, not great. We know that there's some really terrible scenarios that have been modeled out. Where we get the benefit of autonomous is really what is the triple revolution. This may have been something that you've heard from academic circles, certainly Dan Sperling and UCLA's Transit Institute, but this is what everyone's hopeful for is the shared electrified autonomous fleets. And so this is shared, meaning more of a ride-sharing model. You don't own the vehicle, you use the vehicle when you need to use the vehicle. The vehicles themselves are on electric powertrains, and certainly the autonomous function brings down a lot of the cost of the transportation. And so we want to make sure that this model is available to everybody equitably. Obviously, these things are better together. This is just a picture of the Chevy Bolt. This is a vehicle that is already on the Lyft platform through our Express Drive program. So there are Lyft drivers who are driving fully electric vehicles in California, and I believe in Chicago. We know that there's a lot of work to be done on the electric grid to make sure that we have capacity to keep adding these vehicles. But we know that there's a lot of incentive in California to do that. We think this will be a model for the rest of the country. And we know that these electrified vehicles obviously bring down emissions significantly. We know also that these vehicles, electric vehicles, are not very cost effective for the average consumer. If you're only using it 4% of the time, each of those trips is very expensive. But we know that there's a tipping point when you're putting it onto a fleet model where they're operated continuously. The per mile cost is actually quite low and very, very attractive. So this is just some studies from the Rocky Mountain Institute looking at the reductions in greenhouse gas. And like I said, that price point where the tipping, they find about $200 billion can be saved between gasoline and long-range EVs if you're looking at a fleet model. Know that automation can really drop the cost of transportation. We think this is really great for especially the communities mentioned before, low income and people with disabilities and senior communities, people on fixed incomes. And this is what we're really hoping. We're really hoping that private car ownership will basically be over. We have seen it's the 50s sort of fantasy of what America was with your private car. For most people, especially those living in cities, is no longer that. It's really a hassle. It's if you look at people in their cars, I do this all the time because I'm always in the passenger seat. People want to be doing anything else but driving. Eating, putting on makeup, singing, watching a video, anything. So it's very clear that people are less interested in the actual act of driving for the most part than we've been led to believe. And so we imagine that this will continue. Private car ownership could continue, but we think of it maybe more like horses. You can still own a horse, you can still ride a horse, but it's not going to be your primary mode of transportation anymore. And so, yeah, we're thinking, there's going to be a subscription program. That's how we're kind of thinking how this would work. We know that autonomous is in the long term. There's going to be a sort of a transition period when there will be human drivers. And we know that for the foreseeable few years, there's going to be more drivers necessary to meet some of this demand. But we do know that it's actually been very effective at getting people to at least consider giving up their personal vehicle, which is a huge mental shift from even just 5-6 years ago. We've seen somewhere between 4 and 9% of people using ride sharing currently, even without autonomous technology, just currently have at least considered giving up their vehicle. And we think about 4% have actually done it, at least partially because of ride sharing and the confidence that it gives you in your transportation. Just a little bit about smart lanes. We support smart lanes and congestion pricing. We think those are important. And this really quickly is a remodel of, so we worked with Nelson Nygaard, which is one of the major transportation planning consulting groups. And how do we redesign Wilshire Boulevard in Beverly Hills? This is what it used to look like, very mixed purpose, general purpose lanes, turn lanes. And in an autonomous connected realm, they've actually taken the same space and used it better and increased the throughput. Added a bike lane, a protected bike lane, general purpose lanes, and loading zones for those autonomous vehicles. And so this is just to say that we are getting very much invested in the future of what the city infrastructure looks like as well. And so we've been very, very present in San Francisco, especially looking at how do we redesign cities to really accommodate the future of autonomous vehicles. So thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you. I think if you just hit it, it'll work.
Yeah, that was actually,
Okay.
If not, we'll figure it out.
Okay, good enough.
Published up.
That's very good.
That's cool.
Hello, my name is Ryan Tuohy. I joined about a month and a half ago Starship Technologies as a Senior Vice President of Business Development. We make autonomous delivery robots. And I put together a few slides myself this morning, which to give an overview, and I'm really excited to perhaps be introducing to the concept to some of the people here. Perhaps you already know about it, and then hopefully we'll get into an opportunity to ask some questions about what your thoughts and concerns might be. So this is a picture of our robot. This is actually not the most recent robot, but it's the most recent one in production. Our robots are designed to be small, slow, and inherently safe. They're also cute, and if I don't get that, I'm not offended. I'm not at that point yet, but I've basically been on the road for the last 6 weeks, and we usually bring a robot with us, and most people say it's cute. That's not an accident. Our founders founded Skype. Jonas Fries, in particular, is a very passionate designer, and he knew that when he wanted to create this new mode of efficient, safe, environmental transportation, that we'd be introducing it into the pedestrian environment. So it was very important that it be safe and that it appear safe, and that when people interact with it or they see it, they feel good and they don't feel threatened. So we're here to make local delivery convenient, efficient, and fun. I think this is a statement we've been using for a while. If we think about delivery, it can mean a variety of things. It could be bringing something to you. It could be getting something from you. A lot of different models and applications that we're frankly experimenting with various partners right now. Okay, so again, launched by Skype founders. This company has been in research and development phase for over 3 years. For me, as a business person, to come in now to have so much invested in the safety and the autonomy of these vehicles, it's been going on primarily in Europe, significant capital investment. It's the kind of thing you only get to do if you're already a successful entrepreneur, to wait that long before you try to commercialize and really be super conservative about what is the right time to bring these robots into more of a mainstream social environment. We've been running pilots with 10 partners around the world. We're in Europe and the United States. Frankly, historically, more of our operations have been in Europe. We are now a US company based here in San Francisco. That's part of bringing me on and really shifting the focus of the company. So what is the delivery robot? Personal delivery device, PDD, maybe that'll stick, maybe it won't. But it's a delivery device that operates in the pedestrian domains, so sidewalks, crosswalks, footpaths, right? So as such, it's meant to operate at pedestrian speeds. We're running at a max speed of 4 miles per hour. Average speed per delivery is actually a little bit lower. In most of the places where we've been approved, we have the possibility of going faster. It's something we might want to do, for instance, in a crosswalk where most people walk faster across a busy crosswalk. Maybe the robot should too. I'm not a science guy, but it's got 9 cameras, it's got radar, it's got different kinds of sensors. Some of it's for cars that are fast and far away. Some of it's for 2 centimeters around it. Its avoidance collision software is tested and tested and tested. I can say that the safety and environmentalism are the 2 sort of values that really are embedded in the culture to the point where we're uber or we're extremely safe in terms of testing things. So in terms of social acceptance, we've encountered about 12 million people around the world. 80% of them don't react. I was surprised by that. I really wanted to test that. I'm like, really? How could people not react to that thing? But most of the time they don't. People, every partner meeting I go to, they ask me if the robot's ever been stolen. Knock on wood, we've not lost a robot to theft. The most common time I get really asked about this is when I'm talking to a dean of a university. And I tell the dean, well, if it happens, we have 9 cameras. We'll be able to show you them doing it, and we'll be able to tell you which dorm room or fraternity or sorority house it's located in. Because it does have the equivalent of, it has a self-powered tracking device which is concealed within the sort of the innards of the robot. So even if you take out the primary battery source. This is real. The funny thing is, an earlier version of the robot, the antenna was rigid, and this encounter was happening so often that it's now a flexible antenna. So in Washington, D.C. this year, we actually saw on Instagram children dressing up as Starship robots. I'm sure that they knew somebody. I mean, we're not mainstream yet. But it was cute, and they were on Instagram. In the United States, our main operations are in Washington, D.C., and here in the Bay Area, although we do have some operations in Fayetteville, Arkansas. We have run over 65,000 miles with these robots, okay? And that's really important because you need a lot of data before you can start combining that with your software and your artificial intelligence to really start driving autonomously. We've made over 10,000 commercial deliveries, and that's all with a R&D fleet of about 150 robots, which we expect to expand significantly. And we're running pilots in the Bay Area. My focus on the next 6, 9, 12 months is really looking at great applications on private land and on public land here in the Bay Area, because we are a Bay Area company now, and to see where we can take this. From an environmental standpoint, not only are they electric, they use about the same amount of electricity as an old-fashioned 50-watt light bulb, and about half of that is to move the vehicle, and about half of that is to send the enormous amount of navigation data that it sends back. But really, that's all I put together for today, so I'll give back some of the time that we're owing from this section, and then maybe we can move on to Q&A.
Thank you.
So I think, Rich, you had a question earlier. Do you still have it? Because we'll have you kick it off.
I'm so excited about everything that's happening. I hope I live long enough to see the results of much of this. But I viewed a PBS special in 1955 about autonomous vehicles. And the technology then was the driver driving onto a highway and connecting electronically with a cable under the roadway. So this is not a new idea. It's a revolutionary idea for us now, but it's been kicked around for a long time. My question is about logistics. The diesel emissions from the way we've changed our warehousing and delivery of goods is increased dramatically. Safeway and Lucky's used to have their warehouses in the Bay Area. It's now in Merced and out near 505 for Safeway. Is there any plans that will, A, eliminate all of the truck traffic that's really clogging 580 and bring these logistics back home so that we're not faced with all of this all of this diesel emissions from trucks that are traveling 3 times the miles they used to make deliveries?
I can speak to what I've seen in the heavy-duty sector. In the last 18 months, we've seen a dramatic uptick in interest from fleets and the manufacturers themselves to figure out EV and to figure out AV. On Thursday of this week, I think at 8 p.m., Tesla will unveil their semi-truck, which is a Class 8 truck that's acceleration, hill climb capability, everything we've heard, it's going to be remarkable. It's a sub 300-mile range truck. So it's designed to really deal with that, I guess, that intermodal problem. What we know of the trucking industry is trucking has changed a lot. It's very difficult for the truck industry to hire long-range drivers. We've invested in rail, so you're exactly right. The new hub and spoke models, where the warehouse is out in Riverside or it's even in Arizona, and we truck it all the way in, it's terrible from a congestion and environmental perspective. So it's I think we're going to see a lot of change. Tesla's announcement of a truck has triggered a lot of reaction. So Cummins has announced an electric program. We're basically hearing from all the big truck companies. So I can tell you the powertrains, especially sub 300 miles, will clean up. What I don't know is if the logistics model is going to change. I think that probably has more to do with what policymakers want and what they're able to implement or resist versus what corporations want.
On a related note there, thinking about one part of the supply chain and what the larger vehicles are going to do, obviously our little robots aren't going to be part of that. But what they are part of is this personal delivery, a lot of it driven by e-commerce, right? A lot of it driven by takeout foods. So, why do we need a 4,000 pound vehicle delivering a pizza? How many FedEx and UPS trucks do we want double parked making their deliveries? I'm a resident of the Mission District in San Francisco, so I'm seeing all this as well. And certainly, 40-pound electric little robot uses a lot less energy than any of those options.
Hi, Peter. I'm Alan Sarver. I had the pleasure of attending the Autonomous Vehicles in the City symposium up at USF last week where you spoke. I was especially excited to note the time frames that you used, that really the the implementation of a network of autonomous vehicles transforming transportation is happening over the next 5 to 10 years and really should be fully impactful within 10 years. These are the kind of time frames I've been using in my conversations. I've been getting sneered at a lot, but I've long believed that that is the time frame we're looking at. And we're really at a crossroads, if you will, where we need to be deciding if we're going to kind of let autonomous vehicles kind of organically be implemented as a bundle of features that encourage people to own their own autonomous vehicles and go toward a dystopian future of much more automobile traffic, or whether we really are transforming our society into a network model of shared vehicle use and driving toward a very near future where nobody has a car in their garage. And what I'm interested in is how do we really grab hold of that as the regional leaders of this, this most advanced transformative environment on the planet, and make sure we're driving toward that future very aggressively.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, to follow up with you, there's two things. One, I think the timeline is going to happen, and I think secondly, it has to happen. I think it is going to happen because if you look at the players in this autonomous space, it's not just startups. It's some very well-established, very deeply funded car manufacturers and technology companies, and so it's disruptive, but it's also disruptive in the same way that like organic food was disruptive, and that it became sort of wholly embraced by the dominant players in that market. So I think that just the amount of money that's being put into it, the amount of interest, and the amount of competition between these companies means we're going to get there faster than sooner than later. And then secondly, just anecdotally hearing how people talk about AV, I had a little panic moment listening to my brother talk when he said, "Yeah, I love AV. It should be great. I can't wait to buy one. I'll never have to pay for parking again because my car will just circle and circle." And I thought, oh my God, this is exactly what we're trying to present. So even just it starts at home, but to that point, I think we really do need to socialize the idea that number one, we need to be taking advantage of these, and that it's available. We should be using them, and we have to create the right incentive structures to get people. We've already sort of created economically a structure where Lyft Line, people are willing to now share a ride with a complete stranger. Because there's security, they're safe in their brain that it's going to be okay, and then secondly that the price is right. And so we're figuring out how to incentivize that same model in an autonomous vehicle. But I think that we will get there. Again, there's just so much at stake.
The one thing I'd add to that response is, while it is very exciting that it's 5 to 10 years away, I think we have to keep in mind that from a climate perspective, we don't have that amount of time. The other thing I would suggest as a former VC is, not as much happens in 5 years as you'd like, but more happens in 10 years than you expect. So AV to me feels a lot like where we were with EV about 5 years ago. So we should be very thoughtful about the unknowns, the cards we still have to turn over. It is going to happen, but precision in terms of when and how. And I think what that leads to is it is very important that we don't neglect our infrastructure. So I don't make trains. I'm not in the rail business, but when I look at something like the electrification of Caltrain or Miami-Dade looking at rail, I cringe when policy planners are putting off infrastructure because autonomous micro vehicles are going to save us. We're going to need if you just look at the urbanization that's going on, and if people do start giving up that third car, then that second, then that only car, we're going to need a lot of infrastructure. And so projects that do take a long time to implement, like adding capacity to Caltrain, we got to be full speed ahead on electrifying that and adding seats, because as this comes together, it's going to be a lot of AV and a lot of transit.
Ryan Popple, this is Tom Gage from Marconi Pacific, mostly to you. Talk about, if you would, recharging. The alternatives, I guess the ones that I'm familiar with are plug-in, battery swap out, and then electrifying the road. What's your thinking about that, and where are you now, and where do you see the future going?
Yeah, one of the neat things that's going on is that the Bolt that you saw during the Leaf presentation can plug into the same cord as an electric bus. So we're finally to the point where we have standardization on plug-in charging, and plug-in charging has gotten really powerful. We're at 50 kilowatts now. We're going up to 100 and possibly 300. So I think charging is going to be less exotic than some people have forecasted. So wireless charging may or may not happen. Through the road charging may or may not happen. Most of our customers are plugging them in at night, driving them all day. And then the synergy we're starting to see that's pretty cool is you could put in a park and ride facility where buses could recharge overnight, and autonomous vehicles, Lyft, personal electric vehicles could recharge during the day. I would say for long-haul trucking, I could see something like catenary wire systems working out. That technology works, it's expensive, but I can't wrap my head around how you could drive an electric vehicle 500 or 600 miles and then put a megawatt hour back into it in a half hour. But for the most part, we're seeing, we just implemented in Shreveport, Louisiana, 5 electric buses, 5 CCS DC chargers, and those chargers, you could plug them into a BMW i3, you could plug them into a Lyft. So it's getting fairly simple. Last thing I'll say is there's plenty of capacity at the generation level, but transmission and distribution is where we need the investment. So when we moved in Burlingame, we rapidly exceeded that little telephone pole transformer. And it was a $600,000 local investment to drop in a big transformer. So you'll see where we're going to strain the grid is T&D. That's a great question, though.
To both Ryans, from a civil perspective here in cities and counties and stuff, nobody's mentioned the costs if we were to make these investments.
So I'll take my portion of that really quickly. There's a California Air Resources Board report that would suggest that we'd save, I think it's in the billions if we electrified. So it's no longer on a total cost of ownership basis, and even in some cases on a first cost basis, electrifying heavy duty mass transit is an easy economic case to be made.
What about school districts, things like that?
I'd have to get back to you on it. I don't know that market as well.
In terms of the robot costs, exactly what do you have in mind? Just so I answer it, it's...
Well, say a pharmacy takes on one of your delivery systems. What would the cost be to the consumer or the pharmacy for delivery?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So what, and that's a very specific application where you would want a scheduled, attended, secure delivery, right? So, we view that as we can't be more expensive than the alternative. Even if in the interim our cost structure is higher, to provide that service. There's other situations where customers are not getting a scheduled service with a 15, 20-minute window where multiple attempts are made. When I talk to the major logistics provider, if it's must be an attended delivery, once it doesn't happen on the first try, the economics and the CO2 impact go upside down on that. If we think about things that are getting delivered in a vehicle right now, I mean, you can just inherently think that the cost of our little robot is a lot less than a Prius, right? And the more autonomous they get, the better we'll be able to drive those costs. One thing to point out, which I trimming my slides, the robots are getting better and better at driving themselves, but there's also a human remote monitoring the robot as well. So.
Hi, my name's Lori Kretschmar. Thanks, this is really interesting. Peter, my question's to you. You touched on this, but I'd love to hear you talk a little more. We're already hearing that there's more congestion on the roads because of Lyft and Uber in downtown San Francisco. So what do you say about that?
Yeah, I would argue that point. I think we would all agree that congestion is a problem in San Francisco and in a lot of other U.S. cities. Causes, I think, are actually quite myriad. We've seen the city of New York, when Mayor de Blasio asked his staff to look into it, their report, I think they were expecting, and I think some people were probably hoping, that they would find that Lyft and Uber were the cause of everything. And what they actually found was primarily the problem is construction projects that take away lanes, rerouting, delivery vehicles adding to it, more people being present in the city and personal vehicles than had been before. And so I think it's a matter of like city congestion in terms of population, and then all these other factors that kind of come together. Everyone's trying to share the road, which is a limited resource. So I think there's also we've had a team dedicated to partnering with transit agencies for as long as I've been at Lyft. And so we've realized early on that it's not a zero-sum game. There's actually a lot of progress that can be made working together. And so I give you, for example, today, my Muni trip, I've been a Muni pass holder for the 10 years that I've lived in San Francisco, and I use it all the time. It's primarily how I get to work. Today, my trip involved getting to Caltrain and taking Caltrain down to Hillsdale to catch a Lyft here. However, Muni, due to a medical emergency, did not meet my timetable, so I missed the 9 o'clock Caltrain, which means I had to come up with an alternative solution. And so I think that there's a lot of expanding like how you can get around is really important, and transit can only benefit by having this sort of like plan B, where I have confidence in transit, but I also have a backup in case something goes wrong. So to your point about congestion, I think there's also been some studies out recently that are suggesting that Lyft and Uber are pulling off of transit ridership. But in actuality, that's not really what the report said. That's what the coverage of the report said. The report was much more nuanced to say actually commuter rail and other forms are going up, and there seems to be a reduction in bus service, but we're not really sure why. And we would argue that without more information of knowing what we are replacing, not all bus service, I think most transit agencies would acknowledge, not all bus service is created equal. There's kind of like, your rapid transit core service that might be serving your commuter population, and then a whole bunch of other buses that are probably less popular but also necessary. And if we're replacing a low quality service ride, is that necessarily a bad thing? So I think it's the short answer is there's more research needed. Two, I think that if congestion is getting worse in your city, there's probably at least 6 or 7 different reasons for it.
Yeah, one thing I'd add that's important to remember is we have been in a historically low fuel price environment. What is really challenging for the transit systems, though, is during a period where crude has been $40 to $50 a barrel, car sales and vehicle miles traveled are at historic all-time highs in this country. So we are past where we were in 2008. Nothing lasts forever, and the crude oil markets are notoriously volatile. Crude's already above $60 a barrel. There's a lot of speculation that U.S. fracking isn't nearly as cost-effective as we thought it was. And with oil, we don't know. But what we do know is when fuel prices go up, the cost of moving everything goes up, and people flood back into mass transit. So for those of you who were here during the Great Recession, 101 was empty, and the transit systems were bursting at the seams. And that's right as the transit system's fuel is higher cost. So we are an undiversified system. Transit really should be a good hedge. The reality is transit has peak ridership when it has peak per mile fuel costs right now because of the way it's set up. But I would agree with Peter. It's good transit systems are seeing increases in ridership, and transit agencies that are driving empty metal diesel boxes in rectangles and aren't providing good service, they are losing riders to better competitive options. I like seeing a little bit of healthy competition because there are great transit agencies out there, and there are others that could use a little encouragement to put USB ports in the buses, have Wi-Fi, do something other than a metal box with a diesel engine. And you've got to have the frequency. That's the biggest thing. Healthy transit systems, you can miss the bus and you don't even care about the bus schedule because the next one is right behind it.
Bedingley, County of San Mateo. So, I have a question. Across the bay in San Leandro, when I try to hail down a Lyft, it takes about 25 to 30 minutes. Of course, on this side of the bay, it takes anywhere from roughly 2 to 10 minutes. It really depends on where you're at. In San Francisco, it takes about 2 minutes. What can policymakers do to encourage more adoption of these type of technologies? Like, for example, when I look at Starship technologies, I really see that as a great advantage for like Meals on Wheels or some other use, particularly that serves a public good.
Any policy obstacles?
So there was policy obstacles on Lyft, and then
we sort of segued. I can go first, I guess. So I don't know that there's necessarily a policy solution to it. I think We've seen that, especially in the early days, a lot of Lyft service started in sort of the downtown core areas. That's where you sort of have the density to service that. But as people sort of become more accustomed to their technology, the service areas expand. And so I think, ideally we do want to have like a 3-minute ETA for all rides, but we understand, especially for suburban areas, that may not be immediately possible. There can be, some of the policy things I guess that we could get into are more about, like I had mentioned, sort of transit agency partnerships, where you're kind of expanding out what's available to you in your area. But there's also there's supply and demand that needs to be balanced. And so supply in a lot of ways demand in a lot of ways drives the supply. So the drivers are naturally going to where there is demand. And so I think in the suburban areas, it's still a new idea that you don't drive yourself. It's sort of a new idea that there might be this other option out there available to you. So I think awareness is probably a big question to it. And use case. I think right in the suburban areas, a lot of people either are using it to connect to transit or for late night, sort of like, I want to go out drinking and I don't want to drive myself and avoid a DUI, which is a great, highly recommend doing that. It's really quite advantageous. But yeah, I think there's sort of like the supply, the demand from those areas needs to grow. And so if there's policy avenues to explore to help that, that's probably where they are.
And I know we're short on time, but just real quickly, the fun part about my job is exploring use cases, both commercial and social, for the Starship robots. And some of you in this room know that we don't go to a municipality until we've proactively gone down and sat down with them and agreed on how it's going to work within their public land. And Meals on Wheels has come up, medications has come up, water to homeless people has come up, library books has come up. So there are a lot of potential great applications. It could be very symbiotic to setting up as commercial operations alongside that.
Can I just end with one tiny policy question for you? Because this recently came up in Napa and it came up in Miami-Dade. What happens to services like Uber and Lyft, whether they're AV or not AV, in a disaster response scenario? So there are a lot of people who got up to Napa with an Uber, and when they got the call Sunday night that they needed to leave Napa, not a whole lot of supply of drivers who are willing to drive into a 35,000-acre forest fire. Same thing in Miami-Dade. So there's some tricky questions, and I think it'll be easier to solve when they're AV. You could see a policy where the government can say, okay, I need all of these. But right now, it's pretty hard to get somebody working in the gig economy to drive in the direction of a forest fire. Mm-hmm. Uber charged surge pricing when we had the typhoon. So that's probably not sustainable.
One last quick question for Ryan Popple. Ryan, you live in San Mateo County. You know that we have a lot of small school districts in San Mateo County, a lot of which are represented here today. If any of them were interested in purchasing Proterra buses, is there a minimum order size, or can somebody get like one bus?
So,
a la carte.
That's a cruel joke. Marc was at my 40th birthday this weekend, and I've been accused of taking a bus order from anyone, including Mullin, Illinois, where my big sister lives. So no, there is no minimum order quantity. I actually think, in all seriousness, one of the opportunities that's on the table for school districts, and again, we don't make school buses, it's the VW funding. It's going to have as much impact as the tobacco settlement funding had on air quality. So I actually think, partner with utilities, but school districts should be talking to their elected officials. And I think California is something like $800 million. I might be wrong in that number, but California's got the largest pot of that $12 billion. School districts, I think, would be a really good place for that to deploy. And I don't make electric school buses.
Great. How about a big round for our panelists? So we're now going to bring up Kevin Mullin, who is going, along with Supervisor Slocum, talk about our Connect Award winner. Assemblymember Mullin.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
I wasn't aware of that.
Rosanne. So when Warren and I were discussing our vision for Connect17 5 years ago, we both saw the need to recognize individuals and organizations that are making a difference in government through the use of technology. As we heard this morning, the technology is around us. It's what we do with it that matters. We're looking for individuals and organizations that have not only embraced technology, but have used the technology to enhance and improve how government functions and improve the lives of people we serve. How is technology allowing government to be more responsive and better address constituent needs? How have services been elevated? We're looking for vision and leadership and, equally important, results. We're looking for those that have set the standard. I think our selection of John Walton, Chief Information Officer for the County of San Mateo, fits that description, and I'll turn it over to his county colleague, Warren Slocum, to talk about our honoree.
Is John Walton still here? There he is. Okay. So John Walton, our very own Director of Information Services at San Mateo County, is no lightweight when it comes to technology. In fact, he has over 25 years of IT experience and a diverse background in both public and the private sector. In his current position as the CIO for San Mateo County, John manages a team of skilled professionals who deliver a wide variety of services, including public safety radios, data center and infrastructure, countywide enterprise cloud applications, strategic planning, and implementing open data strategies. Under John's leadership, San Mateo County implemented a countywide shared digital public safety radio system, a hyper-converged SDN data center, and connected the county's first multi-jurisdictional fiber network. John's efforts to bridge the digital divide in our county came with the launch of SMC Public Wi-Fi. Today, there are a total of 38 public Wi-Fi spots throughout the county, providing free Wi-Fi to thousands of residents who didn't have access to the internet. Just a little quick story. I was over in Pescadero recently at a well-known restaurant, Dort's there, and for some reason I had to get on the internet, and I tried, and up came the San Mateo County free Wi-Fi service, and I was able to do my research, and John was responsible, of course, for that. In his spare time, you're going to find this really interesting. In his spare time, you'll find John on the auto racing circuit with his wife and 2 young sons, joining him as members of his pit crew, cheering him onto the finish line in his Ford Mustang GT project car that he built from the ground up. So John, thank you for everything you do. Congratulations. We are very proud on behalf of the Connect17 team to have you as our 2017 honoree. You are setting the standard for our region. So come on up, John. Congratulations. Look at this beautiful black box.
It's amazing.
You like black boxes,
Yeah,
right?
black boxes are great.
Yeah. So I want to show everybody the award, but I can't get this open. Can you give that a try? That's what the Director of Technology will do for you. But look, everybody, we have this beautiful Connect17 award presented to John Walton, San Mateo County's Director of ISD, dated November 14th, 2017. John, thank you for all you do. And really need to get a picture here. Just say a couple of words, will you? Let me get a picture. There you go.
Well, I'm really humbled and flattered, to be honest. Being the CIO of a great county like this means I just get to take all the credit for all the hard work my staff do. And a lot of them are here in the audience. I want to thank them for all the work they do behind the scenes to make these things real. And having worked in government for a while, I will say it also doesn't happen without the support of the elected officials, supporting the vision, being enthusiastic about it, providing the funding to do all these projects. I am a car person, so I do love hearing about all the car things. I'm very fascinated by self-driving car technology and what it's going to do to our society. I'll tell you, I have a 13-year-old son who's already told me he doesn't want a car. He just wants a ride-sharing app and a new iPhone, so that's great. As opposed to my 8-year-old son who's already laid claim to the race car and said that's going to be his first car that he's going to drive to school. So I think there still is, many interests out there in the world of what people want. But, in our county, I think the unique thing about San Mateo County, and I just have to always put in a plug for what a great county this is and appreciate you all being here, is it really is the epicenter where we can test a lot of these technologies. We have so much support in the community to try out these ideas. I think we all see how much it has changed in the last 5 or 10 years. And being in a county that has such a diverse base of dense urban areas and very remote rural areas that people forget about, it's a great place to work with the companies you saw up here today and the towns and the school districts to really think about what is this going to be in the future for our children, for our communities, and what do we want to create. And so I think it's great to be here now with all of you thinking about where do we want to be 5 years from now, where do we want to be 10 years from now. Because listening to the panelists and having these great events every year that Assemblymember Mullin and Warren host, I think it really gives us an opportunity to step back from our day-to-day jobs and just think about where we want to be. So thank you again. I'm happy to be a small part of it, and I look forward to the future events as well.
Congratulations, John. Let's give a big round of applause for John. Right? He's been doing great things for our county for so many years, not just for the county, but for all of us here in the room. Marc and I have a few final thoughts for all of you. One, this is our 5th year of doing Connect, and we really want to stay connected with you, which is why we ask if you continue to look at the app. You're going to get a notification that has a survey. Your survey helps us when we go into the planning phase for next year. So the more that you can fill out the survey, add your comments, add your thoughts, tell us what you'd like to see next year, and allow us to send you notifications every now and then, because we like to do it based on who spoke here today, what information that they're sharing with us so that we can share with you. So it's a way for you to really help us and make this conference that much better as we plan for our 6th next year. I'm going to turn it over to Assemblymember Berman. He wants to say a few thanks, and then we're going to come back and announce our award winners for our Amazon Dots or Echoes. I always confuse them. Dot. Our Amazon Dots, which I have under here.
Thank you, Rosanne. And on behalf of Kevin, Warren, and Rosanne, we want to recognize the sponsors of Connect17. First, Gilead Sciences for opening their doors to host the event and for their staff support and technical expertise. And in particular, we want to thank Casey Hutchinson, who you met this morning, and Maria Rangel and her staff who handled all of our facility needs. Thank you, Gilead. Second to SAMCEDA. The San Mateo County Economic Development Association and Roseanne Foust. We're proud to have her as a partner, and she, Amanda Hawkins, and Christina Fernandez were instrumental with lots of behind-the-scenes support. Thank you, SAMCEDA.
Thanks, Amanda. There you are.
And our other event sponsors, the County of San Mateo and the Redwood City San Mateo County Chamber of Commerce. Thank you so much for your support for Connect17. And thank you as well to Bridget Michelson and Rocky Robinson of Penn TV for recording today's events and partnering with us. We really appreciate it. And as John Walton mentioned, we're only as good as our teams. And so a big thank you to Supervisor Warren Slocum staff, Marcy Dragon, Jim Borgart, and Bob Marks, and Assemblymember Mullin staff, Mario Rendon, Susan Kennedy, Carol Ong, Ben Cohn, and Kevin Fong, as well as to my team, Zach Ross, Louis Maroney, and Leslie Bulbuck, for all the work that you did both before today and here, helping make sure that today works seamlessly. Thank you very much. And I'm going to turn it back over to Roseanne to announce the winners of the Amazon Dot.
So we have 2 dots, and is Amy Koo here? I believe she's here. So Amy, you won. These are for the people that engaged with the app. Thank you, Amy. And Brian Carey. Brian Carey? Brian, yay.
All right.
You're welcome. And I hope everyone got one of the little speakers, the Connect speakers. If you didn't get one, make sure you pick one up before you leave.
Even Supervisor Slocum was playing. He played DJ the other day at a meeting with those. So you can plug them. You can get them going really quickly, and they're a lot of fun. And thank you so much. We look forward to continuing the conversation and seeing you at Connect18 next year. Thank you.
Holly.